everyone. I'm Sarah Christensen from When Sages View Astrology. Welcome to my Bridgerton series. I am having fun doing a deep dive in astrology with the season 3 actors for Nicola Coughlan and Luke Newton. And this video is a continuation of the previous video on a deep dive I'm doing on Luke Newton's charts from a progressed chart standpoint, that in connection to his natal chart. We always take a look at the natal and the progressions together. And from the information that we have come to aware, the Venus, the progressed Venus for Luke Newton having a big impact of kind of what we can visibly see is the progressed Venus being exactly the same degree as the total solar eclipse that happened in April 8th of 2024. So we're going to continue this deep dive and then go from there to kind of expanding on this awareness of what this can potentially symbolize for him and what that means. We are making the assumption that he is a Leo rising with the moon in Cancer, and of course he is the sun in Aquarius. But if he was born later in the day, then it is a very strong possibility, less probability, but still a potential that he could be a Virgo rising and a Leo moon with that Aquarius sun. But because of some things that are mapping out, I feel like he does have a Leo rising sign, and it was accentuated by Nicola in that BuzzFeed video. So I'm still kind of going with that one, but I will explore, because I'm interested to explore how much things could change if he is a Virgo rising. From all things considered, I think this is still pointing in that direction. But as an astrologer who likes to be accurate, I prefer accurate birth times. But we don't have that. So we're doing a whole sign perspective. So a sign for a house. I like to, from an evolutionary astrology standpoint, we like to use Placidus, as I'm a student and graduate of the astrology of Stephen Forrest. So I can bring that forward. I'm trained in both evolutionary astrology with Stephen Forrest and traditional astrology with Demetra George. So I have rich background of teachers for what I've learned. So, but I'm kind of weaving in some things between the two for kind of trying to take a leap forward from what we know. So I want to point that out. That's important to point out. This is for fun. This is for entertainment, but it does bear a lot of truths that with certain planets, because the speed of a planet and what we can get from that in the transits from the natal chart and these kinds of things. Houses and angles are important, but when we at least have the rising sign, we know what the first house looks like, and then we can kind of translate that from there. But again, prefer exact birth times. It's really really nice to have the actual angles, because the angles are so powerful. Okay, so I hope that's just a really quick summary to get everybody on board of kind of the astrology and the technical parts of it. I try not to get too hung up on that. We just want to enjoy it. We want to gather some insights and information that, maybe solves a burning question that you may have, or what you're making assumptions on. So we continue that we're still making assumptions, right? Because there's a certain level of a person's experience has so much going on in the inner world, and then what we may see on the outer world experience and us looking at a distance. So that is always true for a celebrity chart. So I want to point that out. But I think it's a good opportunity to kind of get engaged with astrology. So I put it as a learning experience as well. So I hope you have fun. We're going to deep dive into Luke's chart a little bit more. This is a continuation of the last video, so it's kind of a continuation of that. So I hope you enjoy, and I love to hear your comments, your thoughts, anything that is percolating up for you. Put it in the comments. I will, as you have noted, I like to add on to the comments and something that may come at a later moment where something gets illuminated just from the exchange. And so I value that exchange with everyone. It doesn't matter how deep you are with astrology. Your questions are valid and very interesting, and what you might be learning. So let's go. The next chart this is Luke's chart with the LA, if he was in LA. I believe he was in LA based on Instagram posts, but could be wrong. He could have been on an airplane. But I think he was doing promotional interviews and things like that, but also having some time off from those pictures. What I want to point out here on this April 8th transit chart for Luke is just a little bit of detail here, right here. So with the sun at 19 degrees, this was during the eclipse. There's the moon at the eclipse. The north node was at 15 of Aries, and that is important, I think, in Nicola's chart. But in terms of during the eclipse, all of that energy, including Chiron, Mercury was activating it by transit in the retrograde. That sits on his Venus in the progress chart, which is really pretty dynamic. And that was before the bulk of his international travels, because he went to Australia and then Italy, Brazil, Toronto, New York, London. I mean, there's other ones in there, I think, but those are several. But definitely when he was, so that's important to point out. And at the eclipse moment, I think this all sits on Nicola's Jupiter. Of course, Pluto is still there, but that's really important to see. And also see that Jupiter is about to make that conjunction with Uranus in his house of friends. So I think this is not on the outer, I think it's pulled Placidus chart. So the Taurus is also part of his 10th house. So it's very visible, his public reputation. But from a Placidus standpoint, it puts it into the 11th house of friends. So there's some kind of event going on with the friend group potentially. Now, we don't have exact birth time, so that's a potential that it might not be that house. But I still think there's a potential because that is activating his Pluto in Scorpio and his Psyche in Scorpio. And look at that. The vertex of the moment of the exact total eclipse for LA has the vertex right there, also activating it too. And so that this makes this part of the chart really potent. So my question about this is there's something that's moved forward, and I believe that in 1 year's time, and the reason I'm using 1 year is because the event that I have the pictures of Luke Newton was at the observatory and at that cafe or whatever in those photos that were in Style magazine or something. And then I think the next day Luke and Antonia were taking pictures at the observatory, or they were actually taking the pictures on the April 7th, and the next day was the total solar eclipse. And so what I think is important is there could be within a year that separation, because if that's the first kind of moment that they're together and they're publicly sharing it more, there's something that happens and that can separate them. That total solar eclipse is pretty powerful, and it's kind of showing up in his chart in such a big way with the Venus. So the Venus that's connected there is going through a transition. So that's a potential. Not that I like to share that with people, but if they got together more dynamically, more vulnerable around April. Yeah. And it's interesting that those were the pictures that kind of proved they were together more than the New Year's Eve imagery. I think they were dancing, or the friends as a group were together. I don't know if there's any other photos, but that's all I know. I hope this makes sense in terms of the potentials related to his loves or who he's attracted to, Venus, are going through change right now. And it's an on-off switch because of the total solar eclipse. Timing is everything. So if he's only ever been friends and has kept his friendship with Lucilla, gosh, I did it again. If he's kept his friendship above, like professional, flirty, but professional, then it's still just friendship. But it could be that it triggered something after the eclipse by being together during the promo tour. So to me, there is an interesting potential that we can't quite see yet, because there's time has to move to show how Luke may reconnect on his Venus. So could it be that it's just another type of relationship? Could be. So I just want to point that out. That's important to point out. And Psyche is definitely involved. Psyche, interesting that the eclipse was on his Pallas Athena. Exact. Interesting. What else do I have to say about that? Pallas Athena is more like a wisdom thing, strategist. And it's like Psyche is something in his personal psyche is looking through the lens of other, like a significant other that's committed relationship, 7th house. And so is that Antonia, or is that someone who is more strategic, more mature? So I think the latter for the wisdom. There's something going on there about learning about something connected to something he's realizing. Okay, so I think that's given us kind of a look at kind of the most important things with the transits of the total solar eclipse, April 8th. But it's kind of an important note that it's affecting something on a higher level from his progressed chart, and how it's really activating all that energy. Those are transits. But remember, Venus is 19 degrees in his progressed chart. So his Venus is getting affected on another level. And it's definitely happening about how it affects his daily life, but also the whole mentor-mentee relationship. Something's dramatically happening there. Okay. One other transit that's coming up next year, I believe. I'll have to look at my dates, but it is when the Saturn and Neptune, and Saturn and Neptune right now are retrograde. So they're moving backwards from our point of view on Earth outward into the heavens. So by observation, they're in retrograde. So there's kind of something being revisited on that inner world, the place of vulnerability, the place of what we understand about our deep bonds from his perspective, and what was maybe transpired in his travels, through his travels. There's a review going on because Saturn is moving backwards. It's like, what do I feel? What are my feeling, my emotions? Saturn does have a restriction on it. I've contained something, but it's very visible with being so public in the public eye. So there's something to that. But Saturn in Pisces takes the shape of something. And but as it goes, these two planets are actually going to make a conjunction in February of 25, I believe. And then after that, Jupiter by transit will move out of Gemini and then go into Cancer. But we'll also then have Uranus then go into Gemini. So there's two things that I think about the relationship with Antonia as it pertains to Luke. One is that when Saturn and Neptune come to, the first degrees of Aries, when they make their conjunction, I don't know if I have my ephemeris with me. I think it's I don't have my ephemeris with me. I'll have to find that exact date. But that date, that timeline, around that time, there's kind of a new experience and something gets activated in a big way, and it doesn't go favorably. Why do I say it doesn't go favorably? It goes in a way that might have some anger with it, because Saturn in Aries is not in its strength from a traditional standpoint. So it's more instinctual, but not necessarily knows how to play the game. And so to me, it's like an immaturity thing that might fall out. And then the Neptune in Aries is like fire on the water, like the emotional disturbance, right, of the instinct. Neptune in Aries is a complete, with it combining, starting off a new cycle with Saturn like that in early 25. I think it's like late February. That's really an important turning point for everybody. We move out of Saturn being in Pisces, Neptune being in Pisces, to a complete paradigm shift for people ruled by Saturn. It's like, okay, now your pioneering self needs to come online, and your responsibility for things gets really fast forward. It's Aries. It's like it's happening now. Neptune is in Aries it's like an ace card, right? It's like first, something out of the heavens brings, a very new beginning of sorts. So a new seed, something is redefined, something pioneering. But Neptune has a way of, it's a permeating the consciousness in some way. It's almost like the fire on the consciousness in a way. Saturn gives it some structure, like it has to take shape somehow, and it gives it some kind of boundaries, but Saturn with Aries is like energy that's ready to fight in some ways, but with some strategy behind it, I guess. Yeah, I would probably I'd probably do a little bit more on that, but the Saturn in the Aries is challenged a bit. And those with that Neptune in Capricorn, now the Saturn by sign is squaring that energy. So it's really like, okay, you're going to build some spiritual muscle about these themes that you were kind of brought here for, like what you intended for. I shouldn't say brought here for. It's more your soul intended to be participating in this thing. So how are you going to do it? What are you going to do about it? So which way? So these are free will choices. That's free will. That's Mars. But there are belief systems, like your free will is bound within the context of the archetypal energy that you are playing within. You have karmic stories that have to play out, whatever's ready to have that moment. So for Luke, that does go with that combination of the 19 Capricorn, all that Capricorn energy squaring off with the Aries in his chart. So, and his Venus is involved in that. So, and then you have his Jupiter in Libra. So it has that dynamic in the Mars and Cancer. So it's the cardinal things of his chart, and cardinal, any planets in the cardinal signs are going to have the element of being something happening very quickly, something happening suddenly. It's on off very quickly. That's cardinal energy. And so with the progressed chart, and we saw the 19 Aries, and we know that in the transits of the total solar eclipse, when he was in LA, it's activating something. So this is important, like the direction of something activated in this year and during those moments, promo, like that's kind of I think they said they started the promo in January, but I don't see the international tour in the listing of that. I see they might have been doing other things, like more localized things in terms of the United States or whatever, but not maybe some of the fashion houses and things like that. So that's a possibility. I'd have to do more research on in terms of what other promo we might have seen in like January, February and March from them. Like Luke, was he doing stuff for magazines then that came out later, like that were hitting during that time? I do believe that even Nicola got a cover that she hadn't seen yet when she was maybe in Australia, and they were showing it to her like through the phone or something. Anyway, what's important is kind of thinking about these things were activated during the promo tour, but they might take a year to be realized, if not 18 months, 24 months. Pluto involved is for the 24 months because Pluto on the Nicola's ascendant kind of making such a trajectory of her career and her self-identity. But also if Luke Newton's ascendant is truly around here, then I would argue that he's also got that same thing with Pluto. But if he's a Virgo rising, slightly different. Okay. And so then it would only be on his moon, because his moon would have to be like 1 or 2 degrees, maybe 3 before midnight of February 5th, 1993. So he absolutely has it going over. Pluto could be opposite his moon, and that's the thing that's transforming his body, transforming his emotional self, right? That could be the case, and how he sees his own Aquarian energy being directed back to him, but of his chart. Again, we don't have the time. I really want the time. And the other thing I want to, those coming transits are going to be big for him. Another one that's happening this week, I think tomorrow. Yeah, I think it's Thursday because I'm recording this on July 10th. Tomorrow's July 11th, and I believe that Mars and Uranus in Taurus are going to be conjunct, and that will be opposite his Pluto. So that activates again something. And that's usually kicking something out of the underworld and up for him to like deal with. And when Mars is involved, it's a lot of passion possibly that can be activated, but that could also be a fight. That could be an inappropriate kind of body connection. Not inappropriate. I didn't put that right. That could be a Mars with Uranus is an unexpected disruption on something that the Taurus, does that Mars and Uranus in Taurus opposite the Pluto highlight a potential like, oh, I do have jealousy, like an acknowledgement of something like that click on? Or is there an act of another kind that happens that, maybe not through Nicola, maybe through someone else, and then he's connecting on that, a realization of that? That is a possibility as well. That can be a realization. But Taurus, it's ruled by Venus, so it's maybe very much related to the feminine that he would be attracted to, and connecting the dots on, oh, when there's someone who I really treasure, almost possess, I have an obsession with who they are and their attraction to me, or vice versa, or whatever, and someone else comes in, there can be this disruptive kind of like oof moment with that, right? So that could also be a difficulty thing with honesty and dishonesty, that Mars and Uranus opposite Pluto in Scorpio. But there's other things that can be as well. So I just want to point that out because the transits with the outer planets and how they bear into the chart in a given moment, or planetary transits are activating something, but there's the larger undercurrent of something else, which, as I tried to point out in the progressions, is what is been activated because of the total solar eclipse. And I know that other readers like Aunt Anna from Soul Embrace Tarot was pointing that out in her earlier reads for Nicola and Luke, having like, what happened at the eclipse? There was just all this kind of coming out in the cards about that. And so to me, I can see it in the astrology, it's related to his Venus. His own desire nature is going through some transformation, and there's kind of this on-off going on. So yeah, how much will we witness? I think it will be visible at some point because his Venus is so high in his chart. It's on the top of the chart, so it's visible. Anything that's below the horizon is not necessarily visible, or the 12th house. The 12th house can be, we pick up on it from the unconscious, like if you're someone who's very strong in meditation or has a lot of planets in that, or the 8th house, so you can see into the blind spots basically of people. A lot of reading readers and healers have that energy in the 12th house, 8th house, 6th house. There's something to that you pick up on it, but it's not necessarily that you can say, I absolutely know matter of fact truth. But this is the perception. We all have, based on perception, this is what I'm seeing, right? So, but what is the truth of the soul? What is going on with the soul? And until we have exact birth times, we can't be explicit about it until we have exact birth times. But even when we have exact birth times, the inner world, someone could have a different take than what your perception is that when you're reading. And that's tricky because you can have the archetypal information to read a chart, but you can be in left field a bit. You could have all the archetypes right and be wrong because someone may be more evolved than you can even understand in their consciousness, or they are in the consensus and they're struggling to have a breakthrough, right? There can be that. That's like, this is the life I'm going to break through at certain things, but I'm going to have a really major one that sends me on my dark night of the soul, and that sends me pursuing to understand myself from a higher understanding, philosophy, astrology, the occult, knowledge that we have access to when we're initiated into it. So the fact that a lot of the millennials tie into or are attracted to an interest in astrology at such great numbers compared in other generations, that means that collectively there is this churn for evolving collectively, right? Like it's time. So old paradigms, they will be dying. Other new ones will be born. What will be born depends on what we focus on, what we believe in, right? So our participation in it is, I don't know, sometimes it's like your soul will guide you to all the things that it's like you can't make a wrong choice holistically because there's the wisdom at the higher level that can always come back, do it again, initiate it in another time and space. But your desire is to evolve, because there are accidents in life, because there are accidents that we can see within the energy of something. And when people think that they control something, then that's an illusion, right? Like there are choices to be made, to be sure, but you're operating in the human perspective with what I call the Mercury mind. And that's where you think it's logical. You can find the logic in when you study the archetypes of astrology and even with the tarot and things like that. But it's got a subjective there's a subjective nature to it as well, because of what someone perceives and how they perceive and how they pick that up, and then how they translate that into beliefs, and then how they carry that forward, and then the condition itself, what it carries out over the spiral of time. I like astrology for its ability to get information for ourselves and how we participate with the greater whole, because we are participating with the greater whole, because we are connected in a bigger way than people realize. Some people realize, but not the majority. And so there's an interesting initiation that I think has happened for Luke when he was in Australia with Nicola, and they were pulling up astrology charts and maybe chatting about it. And then having to do that with an actual astrologer, looking at Colin Bridgerton's astrology and Penelope Featherton's astrology, with them kind of, oh, that's interesting about the personality, but it's so much more insightful, and it goes beyond personality. It goes into, what do you want to evolve? If you're a being that wants to forget by going through an incarnate experience and have an incarnate experience again and again, because maybe something didn't go as planned, because we choose to forget. So we have like a unique experience, and yet we have our intuition. We have these kinds of things, our instincts, and what gets turned on, and this is the soul's ability to explore life, the continuum of life. At least that's how I believe it. Astrology is very much something to explore for learning more, understanding yourself, understanding your participation with something bigger. And there's a beauty in that. You can be spiritual within that and have answers within that, but I actually can also bring more questions, part of learning. Anyway, I hope that was fun to explore that. From the total solar eclipse, I don't think I have anything else I want to point out in this chart. That is an interesting chart to explore. The other chart that I have available, this is probably going long, but I want to see. The next chart, I think this was the May 13th red carpet event. I think I've already covered this one. Yeah, I think I covered this one already. The part 1 release. This was just 3 days after the premiere. In New York, there were a few things that we got to have an observation of Luke in the public eye and how that was. But this is kind of the pickup of the collective, of the volume of people who would be picking up on what the storyline is, how they were playing the parts, what parts they were getting, and then how people may be critiquing the show and all of these things. You know, we have the moon down here in Virgo for that critique. But there would be a fascination that was absolutely being picked up, as I have mentioned in other stories or other videos. The moment of the part 1 release, May 16th in New York, this release moment for Netflix hits, you know, the top of Luke's chart. It's in his 10th house from a whole sign perspective. And that energy of the sun, Jupiter, and Uranus, and Venus now, even closer. So this is all kind of tied in, is opposite his Pluto and his psyche. And I think this is where the pickup from the public persona and reputation that he's built as an actor now comes into huge energy. And then it kind of has this opposite tension with his own Pluto and Scorpio and psyche. So his psyche has the kind of the outer kind of coming out of the underworld, now very visible, right? So all the work he's done in 2022, 23, his own life storylines that I think he was in 23, he was in a play also. So all of this kind of background gets picked up because the mass interest, right? So, and the desire nature that's turned on for everybody. So it's all getting picked up. And Psyche is amplifying that Pluto and Psyche is also being accentuated by the Neptune at 29 degrees of Pisces, just flooding the consciousness with these things, the feeling of it all, and the imagination. Yeah. And that that Saturn at 17 Pisces is connected into the ascendant at the moment as well behind it. So this is connecting up with Nicola's Jupiter, which is important because her whole 10th house of career is Sagittarius. So anything that's accentuating her Jupiter. So it's kind of interesting how that all gets picked up. And the midheaven of the event, again, highlighting Nicola's, but his 5th house of creativity, the project that he's done, and Eros, the desire nature. So it's such an interesting view of Eros and Psyche that we have by exploring this release, the different elements of what's going on in their personal lives, but kind of like when it gets picked up by the collective and really gets the extra energy behind it, even with the negative criticism, oh, it didn't follow this or that with the book, or we didn't get enough screen time with these two players. It's interesting that it still had the volume that it got in the streams, and it's still, it's breaking in the top 10 of all time. I think it was at the number 8 level of all the Netflix ever. That's season 3, which still had criticism on it, right? Like there's something else going on at a bigger collective level being all juiced up by this. It's not just the story, it's the actors and the interplay of their charts, and then that projection that's back and forth with the mirrors. So it's really a fascinating topic, and there is Eros by transit in the release sitting on his Juno. Mr. and Mrs. Bridgerton becoming Mrs. Bridgerton. That's in the storyline, right? And yet people want them to be together in real life. So there's this pressure put there but the desire nature is so strong, but it's hitting his own Juno, his own desire for a partner. That is really interesting. So, and then the square with his Venus, there's a challenge that's presented itself, and there's a moire right on his Venus. And that's the part 1 release. Also interesting. I think, and the other thing that is like paramount for the moment is the North Node, the transiting North Node at the release hitting this 9th house. So there's not only the interest in the show and what's released and everybody watching it, but then what it does for looking at things that they have done on the tour, because that's 9th house, right? The instinctual nature is such a part of the storyline, but it's also part of something we're watching with him, Luke, in the media as well. And then the South Node on his Jupiter is highlighting past something in being brought forward, the connection in a relationship with a personal friend, and it's brought forward in the love nature and his creative work. So the more I look at his chart and wonder about his Jupiter and his 5th house of creativity, I thought about all the projects he's done, but truly Bridgerton, because Bridgerton is after his Saturn return. There's the significance of being past your Saturn return for things that get turned on. And his nodes are mutable, related to the friends and his creativity stuff, but it's not leaning into the friends, it's leaning into the creative self, leading in the personal friend. So there's an interesting thing as I dive into how astrology has defined friends. And I found information that really personable friends are 3rd house. They're closer. 11th house is more like allies. Like they're friends, but it's like your social group that you go with, right? But it doesn't mean that they're the super, super close friends. So something to that relationship that's with connection to his 5th house of creativity, 5th house of children. Interesting in the storyline that they have Lord Featherington. Spoiler alert. I think it's important to kind of like how much is in the storyline gets picked up, right? From the actor's chart. That's so fascinating to me. And maybe that is the way it's going to play out those themes. It's only through the work where they might have other things that they desired to include in their life story path and evolutionary, but there are still free will choices. So what do they choose, right? So it has to line up. It has to make sense in the archetypal energy of a moment. That's why we maybe have the sayings like someone's in your life for a day, for a season, and for a life, right? Like they can weave that in, I guess, these little things that we have to understand ourselves. The other thing about the Sagittarius energy is not only was it the midheaven, Sagittarius was the midheaven of the events that's kind of highlighting his creative self and his friendship. It's like so much tying back to his, and talked over and over again and again in interviews about, well, we're friends, we're good friends, or my best friend. These are the things that they said. But the South Node is sitting there on the Jupiter. So it's kind of like reminding me that, oh, there's going to be something presenting a loss of some sort, a little bit, right? Like that's not his node. His node is Sagittarius, but it's hitting his Jupiter, which is his North Node ruler. So it's like there might be a little bit of something that's, when you have South Node touching a planet, it's kind of like that's releasing it. It's letting it go a little bit. North Node, Aries, that's the instinctual nature. This is the direction, right? So that's an interesting thing here. Another thing is at the release moment, because it has just transpired. So that's at 13. So the nodes travel backwards through, because of it's just a point in the sky based on the rising sign. It's based on the horizon and so forth, and the ecliptic and the moon around the earth and how it hits the ecliptic. Anyway, North Node is the rising above on the ecliptic, and the South Node is the descending. So the South Node in Libra there's a relationship that has a surrendering of some sorts going to it. So, and to me, this could be like they have done all this work, 22, he'd been working together since 2019, 2020, dealing with the pandemic and all that, 2021, 22. I think they learned in 21 that they were going to be the next ones up for season 3. 22, 23, doing heavy work, doing their work, all the body transformation stuff that they worked on for themselves to present the storyline. But this is kind of like a release of that creativity to like, okay, you've done the work. You've done all the hard work. Now that we're going to start releasing you from that to that degree, right? Not that they're coming back in season 4, but maybe after season 4, it depends on where they take the storyline to include those characters, how much they come back, right? But that was exact like a month before. So in April, being on that Jupiter more directly. So there's a release going on in the April timeframe. So not only do you have the total solar eclipse hitting on the Venus, progressed Venus, switching something on off, and I would say more off at first, and then it can be re-engaged at another point in time. But it's by no mistake, it's timing, it's divine timing. And the node in the south node in Libra is like there's a change up of this relationship happening and the creative energy involved here. So this personal friend that's a Jupiterian figure is going through kind of that transition. There's a moment of releasing some kind of level of that connection of that relationship, which makes sense. Doesn't mean that they're not great friends. It's meaning they're not every day doing what they were doing. And that's like, okay, it's going to start softening now. You've done a lot of work, and you're kind of, moving towards the end point here of how heavy that work is going to be with this close personal friend, right? Like that creative work. So that makes sense. And yet they still have more time to reconnect. And if you think about the progress chart with his progressed moon going through Libra now and through another 2 years, the moon for him, the progressed moon will be in Libra. It reconnects it from the moon's standpoint. So emotions, but Libra doesn't like to get too deep, friendly. So, but I also think there is a potential for what he may change up, not only as it pertains to his creativity, but his 8th house. His 8th house is a vulnerable spot. It's kind of the place that, in terms of evolutionary astrology, that's the vulnerable, like with sexual bonds and things like that. But some astrologers argue that's all 5th house. But I would say I like that you have your significant other and you learn about their shared their shared values, their shared money. That's also inheritance, all these important topics with a partner. It's kind of like your partner's money, your partner's values, these kinds of things. You learn a lot. So the Jupiter up there, the Jupiter being the ruler, co-ruler of the Pisces sign, absolutely the ruler from a traditional standpoint, is, kind of informing us that there is this softening of this place of vulnerability. It's like it's letting go of the connection to do something else, that Jupiter is getting kind of a transition moment with that south node passing over it. So, and that's just momentarily. That's like transiting nodes aren't this when they're hitting planets like that. When it's not your own nodes. Now notice that is trine to his own south node, trine to his sun. So his co-star because she's pretty significant in the realm of people observing. And so co-star is significant and they have contractual things that have them in view. But this is also kind of like his actual, if truly that is a committed relationship with Antonia, that is also her. So that's also, so there are different things that are happening at different relationships at any time. So that's also kind of interesting. You could also go back when he was releasing his relationship with Jade. And that also, I think, is she was with him for some time. That was a committed relationship. To me, there was a Saturn return. That was a Saturn return moment of maybe having a betrayal of some sort. That storyline works in there. I don't know much about, I think her name was Sophie. When he was with the Lodge, he was dating maybe somebody from there, but he was so young then. That could bring in that was only 2 years. So that could be, the moon moving through a particular sign and progression that allowed that connection. I think it's like he connects with that partner from playing a part, and that's how it plays out. So the time that was involved with Nicola was significant, that they've been connected with the show. So how that relationship does progress will be interesting to see, because there's still more time to be connected. So we'll see, but hopefully that is helpful. So that is all I have on that one for now. Let's see if I have anything else in my things here. Oh, this is when the People magazine photos came out. This is premiere part 2 in New York time. Oh, this was when the London. Oh yeah. So this is the transits at the premiere part 2 in London, but based on the New York time as well. Mercury was out of bounds and Venus was out of bounds. So this was just like from the perspective of, if you were looking at it from People magazine is, I think, headquartered out of New York. That's why I made the chart out of New York. So People magazine is, breaking out the photos on June 13th at 2:12 p.m. And that is the chart for that, and why Saturn is opposite the moon, karmic moment. The midheaven having the south node, releasing relationship ties, or it's showing a relationship and a loss. And the sun, Venus, Mercury in Gemini, with Jupiter, who's just a couple weeks in Gemini. Not even a couple weeks. Yeah, a couple weeks, because it was, in Gemini. And what I think is important about this is it's showing the dual nature of the duality of two significant people that are focused with Luke. Now, of course, this is just the People magazine moment release of those photos, but you can start thinking about their charts in comparison to that. But I think it's absolutely the most important thing here is the Saturn and the moon having an opposition, and the south node on the midheaven of the moment and of the break. And here's Uranus in the 6th house, and then Mars and Cupido, kind of the desire nature being, this is like the lust desire nature, but it not going well. Because it's in the 6th house. And also we have Psyche in that moment at 20 of Aquarius, which I think is right on Luke Newton's Saturn karmic moment, or partner related. Anyway, that is that one. And also Eros transiting in the 8th, vulnerability of the emotions. So there's that. Okay, so this is the after party Paps. Yep, I covered that, I think. Oops. And this is on to Luke's chart. So this is the moment those photos broke. through. And Luke Newton in London, his chart is the green, and then the moment of those breaking through, and you can see all the oppositions that are like opening up that Pandora's box. But most importantly is Saturn opposite the transiting moon, and that activating Uranus is opposite his Psyche and absolutely his Pluto. But there's more to come with that, because that's not exact to the one within, to 25 degrees of Taurus yet. So that would happen within the week or so. That would click over. Okay. And then, but the Mars and Uranus that's happening right now is right there. So I think that's actually breaking more open for him this week and next. So, and then we have the Sun and Venus and Mercury in Gemini, and that's all opposite Eros. So it's a disturbance it's the duality happening of the splitting off of the original desire nature. So there's a separation from it. Like I had this high desire to, tie into the story, and now I've all of a sudden been separated from it because of this dual thing, this other thing that's been introduced to me. So a lot of people who are going to watch the show were highly disappointed, and that would be picked up. The Eros I think that's his moon. But again, that moon could be different. So there's a chance that Eros is evoking something in his own emotional self at the moment, but it's getting transformed by Pluto. So that's all in there. But there is Psyche right on the Saturn. That to me is this is divine timing. It's in the mix. Choices were made, and you have to reap what you sow. So the timing of introducing a relationship when the trajectory of everything that you've been doing, this is breaking something open on purpose. And the on purpose is at the soul level. The soul level is saying all these combinations are perfectly kind of going to give you the mix of what you want to evolve, whatever that explicitly is, related to how you think, related to how you want to move from the Gemini friend group more towards your creative work, your creative self, maybe even children one day, and this tie with family and personal close relationships. There's something kind of breaking open to say past storylines, maybe past lives have very similar storylines, and how it's navigated through a piece of art now and real relationships, but maybe there is something unconscious that has to come up because of the interplay, and that's the only way to bring it up. So yeah, because of how that can be perceived as like a career limiting move. But all that Aquarian doesn't really care, or does it? Because all of that is over here in who's the I don't care. It's the partner, and emotionally it's affecting him because, was that his choice, or was it made for him by someone else, and then he's having to navigate it now? Yeah. And then imagine, I want to present this person as my significant other. Yeah, you can have those relationships, but it wasn't the best timing. So there was no conversation about it. Maybe there was no, we're in this together. I'm on your team. I will stay kind of in the background until, maybe even a month later, right? Or a couple weeks later. Makes it a huge difference in the perception of how people might have picked up things. But there's also an importance of understanding that maybe that's all the things that had to, because there's a perfection in every moment, right? So the perfection is maybe it had to play out like that. So there could be an awareness of looking at something closely and going, such a powerful illusion. First of all, how am I participating in this powerful illusion? What am I picking up on? Everyone picks up a little bit different. I can tell by the questions that people share with me, like, can you do, can you look at this in the chart? Can you look at this in the chart? The way the questions are formed, you can kind of get a sense of where someone is focusing, right? If you're focusing on, that's so curious about how the astrology works so dynamically and how it fits so well, and would be lovely to have an accurate birth time, but there's a reason we don't have an accurate birth time. They haven't shared it. There's a purpose in that too, right? Like you can go a decent amount with a rising sign, but even in the fumble of the information about Luke's information is a part of we can only look so far into the houses as they are presented with a Leo rising sign, right? Because it could be Virgo rising with a Leo moon. And then the mirroring effect is still solid because it puts the Leo moon in opposition to Nicola's opposite of her Aquarius. So it's still powerful, right? It's just slightly different. The angles are very, very important. Things happen on the angles and manifest in life from the perspective of how things play up into the planetary transits, progressions onto the angles and from the angles. So very important. but we don't have that. So we have to kind of go from the gist. And so there's enough to like have, but maybe not, we're not diving in so deep that we're getting too close to the subject, the real subject, right? So there's something to that. What else? The moment of the photos release, I think I discussed the midheaven and the south node in transit and how that connects with his Jupiter. So it connects with that personal close friend. It's almost like yeah, it's about the personal close friend, which the personal close friend is Nicola, but that is his creative co-star, right? Like his creative work, this kind of feels like a loss for that person who's connected to him like that. From our perception, wanting them, there's a desire, and a lot of people like, oh, it'd be lovely if they actually had, more connection. Maybe we're playing into a big illusion even more than it should be. And then how does that look? But yet there's that psyche right on the Saturn saying something else is going on here, especially in the Aquarian understanding psyche with Saturn. The definition of friends, best of friends, there can be a whole different kind of relationship structure that is going on that we don't even know about. So there's something to that. But yeah, I think there's a lot of points that have been brought up. The lot of fortune by transit sitting on this interesting mix. This is a lot of fortune in Pisces at 6 degrees. And Luke has Ceres, the asteroid Ceres, and Black Moon Lilith at 3 and 5 degrees of Pisces. So a lot of fortune is things that happen to us, fated experiences, kind of divine timing, and it's activating dark feminine energy, like shadow energy of the feminine. Black Moon Lilith just tells us where these are in our consciousness, and it's in the vulnerability place. It's the vulnerability with the real close personal friend. This hurts because the reality is his very good friend, Nicola, came to his defense after the fact to remind everyone what a good person he was and all these things. Him being very vulnerable, even though she may have been hurt too and vulnerable, possibly just reminding the collective people, the fan base who don't have the depth of knowledge around them about truly how they are, truly how they feel. It can be very much put on the stoic face to show up in the public, to present yourself in the public eye. But here, this is 8th house. This is a vulnerable place. So this is a vulnerability and kind of like things that went outside the boundaries a bit. So that hurts. That can hurt. That can leave you sad. Like, oh, I wish it hadn't gone that way. I still love this person. I still care about this person. I knew they had a relationship, but I wish that wouldn't have been that way, because it puts the emphasis now on comparing Nicola with Antonia and body types. That's the dark feminine comparison and the betrayal and these kinds of things and the feelings around that. Does that amplify the feeling of worthiness or unworthiness, or how confident someone is, or does that rattle them a bit? Yeah, that would be hard. It emphasizes also his vulnerability of how people perceive him as mature or immature by his choices. So there's judgment. That's the Virgo moon coming. A bit of judgment in there. A really important spiritual thing is when you're initiated into astrology through experiences and truly you really understand what it means when you're going to be going into the underworld and, I need to kind of dial it back and withdraw from being out in the world a bit, because I'm going through a process of integrating something that I have picked up on myself, and now it's being made conscious and it's throwing me into the underworld. Or you don't even realize like what that really is, and you feel like you're in the undertow of things for quite some time because it's trying to bring your attention to it. But some people are aware of it and some people aren't. Those who are can work through things with astrology, therapy, art, a combination of all of these things, oracles, these kinds of things that can work out something and truly heal you to a point where you can progress to another level of understanding and a broader perspective of yourself engaged in all of life and what your full potential is. I mean, you get, another layer of a sphere of consciousness that expands your view. Judgment of others, which is, kind of the shadow side of, like, say, a Virgo moon. A Virgo moon in its light and high presentation of itself would be able to get into the details and be exquisite in how it might find finer details of something like lace, like the best accountant you could ever think of, who is just like perfection in how they can bring in the detail that is required. But when it's critical and hurtful in its criticism, that's the darker side of that. That's the lower energy vibe of that Virgo moon, right? So the attention to details about his own self-worth is important, but not to pull him into the undertow. He has to kind of rise above it. But Saturn on the opposite is also kind of like there's a karmic thing here emotionally happening about vulnerability, the timing of it and how it's picking up. So I hope that is helping understand how the release of the pictures by People magazine, they're going to do what they're going to do. How we, in I guess as long as I can recall, how the paparazzi have, they sell the pictures, people make a living doing that, but it's a way that also when you are, or people connected to you are in the public eye, and how that is used. So it can be used very strategically, and then it could also be used to wound people, or it's both. Some is on purpose, some it happens by accident. Like not by accident, like you could be the person that was in the photo, but you weren't the one responsible for bringing that together, so that can happen. So something else is happening because of someone else's choices, and you're just happy to be caught into it. So there's that. Anyway, I have really covered that. So let's go on to the next thing I might want to talk about. Oh, I pulled this chart because of the transits that were happening just like last Saturday, the 6th of July. Right after that new moon, their Psyche was opposite Eros in transits. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting moment. There might be something else emerging that we'll have visibility to about the Psyche and Eros related to Luke. And I think since then we've seen other pictures of another event. I think the GQ event. I don't know when those came out, but yeah. That is an interesting thing because it's like highlighting again Psyche and Eros, but this is highlighting his Chiron. There's kind of a wound here about the image somehow because it's activating his Chiron. So there's that. And then how that Uranus, there it is, that Mars is almost up to that tomorrow, July 11th. That will be exact at 25. And that to me is a moment that something else breaks through for him at a deeper level for him to kind of look at, and how it touches into his career. So there might be something else that emerges relative to how he feels about something, or his instinctual nature. So these are all kind of things that I've been looking at in terms of the Eros and Psyche. I saw that opposition happening in his chart across his Saturn and his Chiron opposition in his chart, and how that also had the Uranus. This is a fixed square, grand square happening. Psyche and Eros are involved. So an opening for an awakening, if plugged in right, I guess. And it's career related or visible to his public reputation. Okay, in my next video, I'm going to be looking at, finally, Nicola Coughlan and Luke Newton's synastry. So I hope you will tune in for the next one that I have in my Bridgerton series on these two incredible actors and how their Eros and Psyche and the elements of their birth charts and the transiting planets at the time of their promo tour and the premieres in New York and London, and the release for season 3, May 16th and June 13th, when those were released to the public, and how much that has really picked up some fascination in the public, and it continues to break records, and still fascinated to see what it does over the summer, because people go back to these things because they're picking up on something that is maybe unlocking some truth for them in their own Eros and Psyche in their own charts. So thank you so much, and I appreciate your time. If you have any questions that you share with me in the comments, what you're thinking, or in my community page here on YouTube, and we will explore those questions. I will have another video probably bringing those all together. I'm trying to get each of these out that I wanted to do in the first collection of videos to kind of dive in deep and then pull out the questions. Okay, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye now.